الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن تمسك بسنته إلى يوم الدين أما بعد. So as we continue discussing this book, Nukhbatul Fikr by one of the Mashaykh who have made a talkhis of the book Nukhbatul Fikr by Ibn Hajar rahimahullah ta'ala. So this is a book in Mukhtalif, and the last discussion that we had, we were discussing matters pertaining to Mukhtalif al-Hadith. So of those hadith that are discussed within Ilm al-Hadith is what is referred to as Mukhtalif al-Hadith. So they discuss two types, Mukhtalif al-Hadith and also Mushkil al-Hadith. So we have Mukhtalif al-Hadith or Mushkil al-Hadith. So we started discussing regarding Mushkil al-Hadith, and we just also a quick review and then discuss also Mushkil al-Hadith and continue that discussion. So as for what is mentioned regarding concerning this discussion, that we have mentioned as for this discussion, that as for what is said to be what is referred to as Mushkil al-Hadith, that we have discussed that, or Mukhtalif al-Hadith, that we have stated regarding concerning that these are hadith, as they mention, Yahti hadithan mutadadan, that two hadith that seem to be opposing each other. Fi mana al-zahir, from what is the meaning, the apparent meaning. فَيُجْمَ بَيْنَهُمَا, but it's possibility that they can be, those hadith can be combined together, or that one can give a common meaning of those hadith. And also they mention, or يُرَجَّ أَحْدُهُمَا, or that one may take one of the hadith over the other. So that's a discussion between the ulama regarding ilm al-hadith, regarding when we find that the hadith, as they seem to be colliding with each other, or they seem to be opposing each other, but there's ways in which one can unify those hadith. Then what's the approach to be done? So what's the approach to be done? So we have discussed regarding concern with Mushkil al-Hadith is regarding that a difference or between hadith where there's two hadith opposing each other. So two hadith opposing each other. Not per se hadith opposing an ayah or hadith opposing ijma. That does not fall into the discussion of Mukhtalif al-Hadith. So that's, and we have mentioned that before. So I mentioned those things before. As for the second matter that is discussed within this discussion is what the ulama that they deem to be Mushkil al-Hadith. So al-Mushkil al-Hadith, where I mentioned that Mushkil concerning the matter is غير بين or فيه اشتباه, where a matter that you have something which is unclear regarding a matter, where they mention regarding concerning that as for Mushkil al-Hadith, that is cases regarding concerning فيه اشتباه, a hadith فيه اشتباه, and where they mention that a hadith that we have اشتباه في المعنى, in the meaning what a person may derive or understand from the hadith, it is unclear to them. So a hadith, Mushkil al-Hadith, where the hadith that it seems to have unclarity or ta'arud, or there's some form of ta'arud with either hadith akhar or ta'arud mal al-qawaid al-shar'iyya or mal ijma. So this matter regarding hadith al-Mushkil is much more, they say aham, it is much more broader, more general than Mukhtalif al-Hadith. So Mukhtalif al-Hadith is when two hadith oppose each other, but there's a method regarding how one is able to can harmonize between those hadith, and we'll mention that process. And as for Mushkil al-Hadith, is the case of Mushkil al-Hadith, where those hadith that you find that there seems to be that maybe the person is not clear as to the understanding that can be drawn, or it seems to be opposing other matters that are established, other established matters within the Sharia, or other dalil established in the Sharia. So of those points that they discuss regarding this matter, as we had mentioned, that that will add regarding the difference between what is said to be Mushkil or Mukhtalif al-Hadith. So of those differences that may occur between both, that we mentioned that one, Mushkil al-Hadith is much broader, that at times we find hadith opposing another hadith, or we might find that hadith meaning is unclear, or it could be a case where the hadith is opposing something which is established in the Quran. Seems, I use the word seems to be opposing Quran, or the hadith, one hadith seems to be opposing an ijma, or it seems to be opposing the reasoning. So that's concerning Mushkil hadith, which is much broader. This is much broader. So Mukhtalif al-Hadith is one of the forms of Mushkil hadith. So Mukhtalif al-Hadith, where the hadith, two hadith seem to be opposing each other. One saying halal and one saying haram. One saying something is permissible, one is saying something is not permissible. So that's concerning Mukhtalif al-Hadith. So as for this discussion, that so it seems that there's things that by way of hadith that they're opposing each other. So in these cases, that it seems as if they're opposing each other. So they mention regarding concerning that these hadith regarding opposing each other of a reason, asbab, waqu, ta'arud, bin a hadith, we might find that reasons or cases where hadith may seem to be opposing each other. And the ulama have also clarified that this is based upon the nazir or the bahith. So the person who's looking at hadith, for them, it seems that there's something that is opposing, something that is a conflict. They're not being harmonized. So that goes back to the individual. So they mentioned that, asbab, wuqu, ta'arud, bain hadith. So cases where hadith or hadith seem to be opposing, contradicting each other. They mentioned a reason of this, that they mentioned one, that of the reason that seems to be ta'arud ikhtilaf al-i'tibar umum wal-khusus. That at times it may be the hadith that you're looking at that they seem to oppose each other. One hadith seems to be general and one seems to be specific. So when look at the hadith, it seems to be opposing because one saying something which is general ruling and the one giving a specific ruling. So there seems to be opposing, but that's not the case. Is, as they mention, that akhad al-khas al-am, that a person is to take the one which is specific over the one which is general. So that's concerning of ways to rectify that seeming conflict. Another of those reasons, asbab, ta'arud bin hadith, that tabayun al-ahwal. So also you might find that cases concerning the Prophet may do things, not the Prophet that always do everything one particular way. So at times, the Prophet ﷺ may carry out a thing or may do something in different ways. So you might find that in Salah, that for example, that ad-dua al-istiftah, the dua that is in a person open his salah, that you find different narrations. At-tayyat. So you have cases where the Prophet ﷺ sometimes may use several methods in doing for a particular matter. So that shows that that thing can be done different ways. The adhan, for example, can be done several ways. So not as one way of calling the adhan, but rather the adhan can be called several ways. So that's not a conflict, it's just tabayun al-ahwal. Different circumstance or different ways of doing a particular thing. And also, or ahwal, circumstance regarding individuals. Then also, what seems to be conflict of asbab, ta'arud, that seems to be conflict, al-itibar, ada, al-naqla, or al-ruwat, regarding concerning how the narrators, how the transmitter have narrated the hadith. So those who are the transmitter of hadith, the narrator of hadith, how they have narrated those hadith. We might find that at times, by way of the narrators, in how they narrate hadith, that seems to be conflicting. There are times that one narrator, one set of narration of the hadith is done ijaz. That some does the hadith, somewhat summarize the hadith and just mean some points of the hadith. While others may mention the hadith in full length. They give it the full length of the hadith, while others may mention the hadith in summary. So that's of the reason why it seems as if they're conflicting. One who mention the hadith in ijaz, in a summarize the hadith, or just give mention a portion of hadith, then he may miss things. But the one who mentioned the full hadith, then it would include all things. But it seems as if they're conflicting because one mentioned some things and the other mentioned everything. So it seems as if they're conflicting, but rather it's just the narrator that's mentioned, it's a difference in how it was transmitted. And that goes back to the narrators. Also, you might find of cases that this may occur of time regarding sabab, 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 sabab al-hadith, that a reason behind the hadith, where the hadith may be mentioned where the sabab is mentioned with the hadith, and in other times there's no mention the reason behind why the hadith was revealed or the hadith was mentioned. So there's maybe a story, a situation, a circumstance, something that occurred that is attached to the hadith to give it some context. But at times the hadith may be mentioned without the story or the circumstance, so the person doesn't understand the context. So it seems as if they're conflicting, but that's not the case. It's because of sabab al-hadith. So the sabab behind the hadith, that's the, and at times it is not mentioned, so they seem as if they're conflicting. And also a third of reasons, asbab, ta'arud, that seems to be a conflict between the hadith, that اختلاف العلم بالحديث الناسخ one. So at times the person having knowledge with the hadith, it is nasikh wal mansukh, that hadith may have been abrogated. So at times that the conflict may seem the person, the hadith is actually being used, but the person is unaware that the hadith have been abrogated. So he's using something that has been abrogated unknowingly, but the reality the hadith has been that hadith have been abrogated by another hadith. So those are of reasons where at times one may think there's a ta'arud, but in reality it is not. But it's putting all those, understanding those situation and circumstance. Also the ulama regarding ahadith al-ta'arud, bab al-Mukhtalif al-Hadith wa Mushkil al-Hadith, that also where hadith seem to be conflicting with each other, that at times also they put also certain shurut, condition, shurut ta'arud, bayna ahadith. So also they lay certain condition regarding ahadith when there's ta'arud. But when they discuss concerning of those things to take into account regarding Mukhtalif al-Hadith and why they seem to be ta'arud, or Mushkil al-Hadith, why it seem to be ta'arud, of those things the person have to take into consideration as being the shurut. One, ittihad al-mahal, that everything is related to the same mahal of the hadith, the same case of the hadith. Also, ittihad al-waqt, that everything, the same hadith is related to the same time. Or, so these are the things that the person have to take into consideration, and other factors. So you have also shurut, ta'arud bayna hadith. So what are those conditions the person have to take into consideration? So those things are also mentioned by the ulama. Tadad al-hukmaini, where the person after looks at that, so those things are to the factor in, and also al-nisba, regarding a particular ikhtilaf al-ashkhas. So also take into consideration certain difference in circumstance of the individual. So those are the shurut that are mentioned regarding hadith, shurut ta'arud bayna ahadith, and how to harmonize between those hadith. Also of those things that they mentioned, as we had also stated, that the ulama also have written on this topic. So of the ulama regarding in writings on this topic by way of what is mentioned in the books of Mukhtalif al-Hadith, and also actual books that discuss that topic in specific. And I will mention that of the ulama who have written on that topic, and we'll mention some of them, some of those names again. But also to take into account within these books that cover this topic of and of those books, we have Ikhtilaf al-Hadith. So we have Ikhtilaf al-Hadith that have been written by Abi Abdullah Muhammad ibn Idris al-Shafi'i. So Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah ta'ala have written a book on this topic, and of the early ones who have written on this topic. And Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah ta'ala, that he died 208. So 204 al-Hijri. So Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah ta'ala died 204 al-Hijri, and he wrote a book, Mukhtalif al-Hadith. This book, Mukhtalif al-Hadith, that is a part of the collection that is called Al-Umm, attributed to Imam Muhammad ibn Idris al-Shafi'i. So the book Al-Umm, that's a collection of the works of Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah ta'ala, and of those that within it is Ikhtilaf al-Hadith. So you have some print, it is mentioned by itself, and also it is included in the book Al-Umm, the collection of the work of as in this, so it is mentioned Imam Shafi rahimahullah ta'ala that mentioned things based upon Abwab al-Fiqh, based upon Abwab al-Fiqhiyah. So hadith that seems to be contradicting and of the early ones who have written on this particular topic. His intention was to mention all what is included in Mukhtalif al-Hadith, but mention what he thought was relevant or what he could. Another of those who have written on this topic, a book that is titled Ta'wil Mukhtalif al-Hadith. Ta'wil Mukhtalif al-Hadith, and that is written by Abi Muhammad Abdullah ibn Muslim ibn Qutaybah. So Ibn Qutaybah have written on this particular topic, also as a book that also is in print on this particular topic. And he mentions, and he died 276. He died 276 al-Hijri. So show the ulama writing on this topic from in the early books. The third of those books that have been written on this topic is the book that is called Sharh Mushkil al-Athar. Sharh Mushkil al-Athar. And that's written by Abi Ja'far Ahmad ibn Muhammad ibn Salama al-Tahawi. So referred to as Imam al-Tahawi, and have many works that he have written. And Imam al-Tahawi rahimahullah ta'ala that died 321. He died 321 al-Hijri. And Imam al-Tahawi rahimahullah ta'ala, known to be one of the ulama initially, that his uncle was al-Muzani al-Shafi, Sahib al-Shafi. So his uncle was al-Muzani. So he grew up studying with his uncle, learning fiqh, al-Shafi. So initially, al-Tahawi rahimahullah ta'ala was Shafi'i. Then after a while, then he switched and turned to the madhab of Abu Hanifa. He became Hanafi. Even though I mentioned that he was in Misr, that the madhab of Ahnaf wasn't really prevalent then in Misr, but he became Hanafi. But overall, that he have written many books, and of the books that he have written, books in fiqh al-Hanafi, books in Aqidah, books also in Hadith. So Tahawi rahimahullah ta'ala, that he wrote this book, Sharh Mushkil al-Athar, and considered to be the most awsa kitab in this chapter. So it's the most it's a large size book that come in many volumes on this particular topic. So a book that goes in depth, in length, in detail regarding this particular matter. So this particular book regarding Sharh Mushkil al-Athar, and also he has another book that is called Sharh Ma'ani al-Athar. So he has another book that the name seems similar, Sharh Ma'ani al-Athar. That book have both are in print. Sharh Mushkil al-Athar, that of the ulama by the name that he mentioned, Mushkil al-Athar, that he can somewhat include what is referred to as, some of the ulama don't make a distinction regarding what is referred to as Mushkil Hadith or Mukhtalif al-Hadith. Some of the ulama does not really include both within the same topic. Some of the ulama make a distinction regarding what is said to be Mukhtalif al-Hadith, and as they mention, a hadith which is Mushkil Hadith. So of those who does not make a distinction between both, they include both as within the same topic, while others make a distinction between both. So At-Tahawi rahimahullah ta'ala, that includes both within this, as his book Mushkil Hadith. He sees the more general that include Mukhtalif al-Hadith or Mushkil Hadith. So that's, as we mentioned, that book with Sharh Mushkil al-Athar by At-Tahawi, that the structure of the book, or how he organized the book, not per se different mawdu'at that is mentioned in the book, but as for the structure of the book regarding that the book is one, a hadith that are mentioned al-Musnada, wal-Athar al-Musnada in that book. Also, that he discussed many different topics within that book, or many different subjects are mentioned within that book. Of those things that he discussed within that book, matter related to aqaid, matter related to adab, fara'id, janayat, buyu, nikah, iman, akhlaq, even asbab al-nuzul, wa qira'at, wa mushkil al-Quran. So in that book is very more a broader approach regarding what I said, mushkil athar or mushkil hadith, in a very broad sense. So it contains Mukhtalif al-Hadith and also what is referred to as Mushkil Hadith. So that's the book of Tahawi. That the thing with the book of Tahawi, Shar Mushkil Athar, that it wasn't organized in a way that is very easy to find the topics. It's not very, so things are somewhat scattered regarding how it is organized, not in a systemized way as well, like Abwab al-Fiqhiyya. It's somewhat scattered, discussing one topic, then go to a next topic. So somewhat, the topics are somewhat scattered, but discuss various topics. So you find that, and that print has been printed, Shar Mushkil Athar, by Al-Risala, with the tahqiq of Sheikh Shuaib Arnaout, in around 16 volumes, But then you find one of the other mashaykh that made some khidmah, did some work around that work, the book of Shar Mushkil Athar, where I mentioned they do a work that come also in around 10 volumes or so. It referred to as Tuhfat al-Akhyar bitartib Shar Mushkil Athar. So the emphasis of this book is to reorganize the structure, the topics of that book. So more structured, more easier. And this is the work of one of the with Ribat. So a Sheikh Abu Hussein Khalid Mahmoud al-Ribat, that he did some work on this. So he did this work which to put things in the normal structure regarding al-Iman wa Abwab al-Fiqh and that like. That is the more known ways of how works are structured or books are structured. So that's concerning those works on this particular topic. Also regarding the matter regarding Hadith, Mukhtalif al-Hadith, and also you have other works that are there. You have other works that are there on this topic of past and also. So you find some of these works have been summarized. So if these works have been summarized, so some of these works have been summarized by those who came after. But as for the book that we mentioned, Shar Ma'ani al-Athar, by At-Tahawi rahimahullah ta'ala, that book discussed more so the tartib is fiqhiyya. So it's more of like a tartib al-fiqhiyya, fiqh book that I used to cover fiqh-related matters regarding, so that's a more fiqh-related matter. And also you find others who have explained that book. Those books, Shar Ma'ani al-Athar, that book also I've given a lot of attention by the Hanafiya. So the ulama of Ahnaf, I've given a lot of attention to the book, Shar Ma'ani al-Athar, of those who have explained the book, and different work around these works of Tahawi, mostly by the Hanafi as he's deemed to be the ulama of the Ahnaf. And also one who kind of somewhat at times that defended the madhab. So use the word at times he defended the madhab. And so that's concerned the works. Others that have done more so works of contemporary. So we have a book that's called Mukhtalif al-Hadith, بين المحدثين والأصوليين والفقهاء. And this is a work that is done by a Sheikh, a Dr. Usama ibn Abdullah Khayyat. So, and he's one of the Imam wa Khatib in Masjid al-Haram al-Madani. Al-Haram al-Sharif al-Mekki. So, Sheikh Usama ibn Abdullah Khayyat did a work that's called Mukhtalif al-Hadith بين المحدثين والأصوليين والفقهاء. So those are some of the works on this particular topic. Of those things regarding, as we discuss, Mushkil Hadith. And those who make a distinction between Mushkil, they mention that Mushkil Hadith, that we find that this Hadith that seems to be Mushkil, that either difficult or seems difficult to understand by some, or Mushkil by way of it seems to be conflicting with other Islamic sources by way of they will mention that, that so that's of the topic that they will look at. So they mentioned that Ishkal will arise in the meaning of the Hadith, either by the Hadith itself, that particular Hadith, one of some difficulty to understand the Hadith. with some of the people, even though it doesn't conflict with other hadith, but just that the hadith itself, that hadith, it have things that some may not grasp. Other of the conflicts that may come regarding ikhtilaf, يكون إشكال, اشتباه, عدم التبيين regarding a hadith. It could be that sabab ta'arud with ayah or hadith. So at times that seems as if this hadith is conflicting with another hadith or with ayah, with a ayah. So the person see that there's a conflict between this hadith with another hadith, or with this hadith in front of him and also with what he understands from another ayah. So that conflict between two sources. And these sources, then I mentioned also the conflict, the misunderstanding, yakuna ishkal, that also some type of misunderstanding, بسبب تعارض hadith mal ijma, that hadith that we have seem to be conflicting with al-ijma, that an ijma is mentioned, but this hadith seems to be going against that ijma, or they're not coinciding together. So that become a mushkil. A third reason, sabab, ta'arud, between a hadith, ma'al qiyas. So of mushkil hadith, it could occur, or it is stated, it could occur with a ta'arud, that there's a difference between a hadith and qiyas, analogy. A fourth reason, sabab, yakuna, ishkal, بسبب تناقض الحديث بالعقل. So it could be something which is based upon the hadith seem to be conflicting with al-aql, reasoning, according to that person with the hadith that is looking at the hadith. So also, yeah, these are the main of the reasons that are there. You might find that in today's time, that other point to add, that you might find that of some who of those that they try to make it seems, or I mentioned that there's within Mushkil hadith, that may be classed as Mushkil hadith according to them and their approach, that there's some conflict in the understanding of hadith and the application of hadith, where they said that the sabab is because of ما يجري بالعرف اليوم, what according to the urf of the people of this time, or the practice of the people of this time, that hadith conflicting with the practice of the people of this time. The hadith, for example, of a woman being the head of state, that they may have conflict with hadith. Hadith that people may have conflict with hadith regarding its authenticity, but it's a hadith regarding cutting off, amputating of the arm. So people may have conflict based upon the practice of the people of our time. A woman traveling without a mahram. So a woman who wishes to travel abroad without a mahram. So these are the things that they try to throw into the matter regarding Mushkil al-Hadith, where according to their understanding, or what it seems to be the practice of today's time, they see that these hadith are conflicting with the practice of our modern day time, and by societies that may not, and by certain societies. So those cases are different cases where I might find that it is based upon at times deviation rather than misunderstanding. So at times it may be based upon a person of deviation in how they look at Islam and the approach of Islam, where they try to water down Islam, and they try to make it, and they use and when they reach these hadith, they class that hadith with mushkil, based upon them watering down Islam. So that's concerned that matter. Also from this, the ulama have also highlight from Mushkil hadith and also Mukhtalif hadith, that also that falls on the topic regarding not al-mutun, which it goes in topic regarding scrutinizing the text itself. So with these matter regarding Mukhtalif hadith, both hadith, for them to be opposing each other, must be hadithan sahihan. Both hadith must be maqbul. So Mukhtalif hadith must be with hadith of a conflict where both hadith are authentic. So if the hadith is authentic and one is not authentic, it doesn't fall into Mukhtalif hadith. So of the criteria of Mukhtalif hadith, that both hadith must be maqbool. So that's a point to take into consideration. And also, so, but it shows regarding that, the ulama of hadith do look at hadith from both aspects of the hadith, being the isnad and the rules regarding isnad, verification, and second, regarding hadith, even after they have passed the bar, passed the criteria of being authentic, also looking at the what can be understood from hadith, which is not al-mutun, checking and critiquing the wording of the hadith, the text of the hadith. So even though it's past the bar of authenticity, also it needs to be checked and looked at regarding the meaning that can be derived, and is it conflicting with other hadith. So this shows regarding concern that this kind of somewhat shows regarding the accusation that ulama of hadith does not put any emphasis, or the ulama of Islam, much into hadith, the hadith by way of the matan, then that's false, as this discussion prove otherwise. That ulama of hadith regarding Mukhtalif al-Hadith or Mushkil al-Hadith, that they pay attention regarding the text of the hadith itself, the matan of the hadith. Also, of those things that they mention within this discussion regarding Mukhtalif al-Hadith or Mushkil al-Hadith, that a point that they discussed regarding concerning that the ulama have mentioned regarding that Ibn Hajar have mentioned that what is included in Mukhtalif al-Ulama mentioned what is included in Mukhtalif al-Hadith, يدخل في مختلف الحديث كل تعارض, that what is involved or included in this discussion of Mukhtalif al-Hadith, any hadith that seems to oppose another, whether sawa ma amkan fihi al-jam, whether the person able can unify between those hadith in its meaning, of a coherent meaning in combine between those hadith, or ma thabata nasqi, or what have been authenticated regarding the hadith has been fall into nasikh al-mansukh, it has been abrogated bin nas, or ta'adhar bayna jam, the person unable to combine between the hadith or not. All of this fall into Mukhtalif al-Hadith, or a person make tarjih, as we'll discuss next. And that's the approach of Jumhur of the ulama. So Jumhur of the ulama, they will include all this in Mukhtalif al-Hadith. Amongst them Ibn Salah, Nawawi, Sakhawi, and others who put all ta'arud between hadith within the chapter of Mukhtalif al-Hadith. Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, rahimahullah ta'ala, as in his book Nukhbatul Fikr, with Nuzhat al-Nazar, or his book Nuzhat al-Nazar, that Ibn Hajar rahimahullah ta'ala, that he said that Mukhtalif al-Hadith khasa bima amkan fihi al-jam. So Ibn Hajar rahimahullah ta'ala, that he includes that Mukhtalif al-Hadith are those cases where hadith seems to be of conflict, but you're able to can jam, you can able to combine between those hadith, to harmonize between those hadith. So to harmonize between those hadith, if you're able can do so, give it a unified meaning or understanding, then that is Mukhtalif al-Hadith. Then I mentioned amma ghayru, if it is not able to come to the harmonized meaning, فَلَيْسَ مِن Mukhtalif al-Hadith, then it's not including Mukhtalif al-Hadith. That's a different discussion. I fall into a different bab. So those ones that are, you're unable to harmonize between those hadith that seems to be conflicting, then he mentions if you're unable, then that's a different discussion. If you're able, then that is Mukhtalif al-Hadith. As for the method that the ulama approach regarding and how to harmonize, so when a person finds that he has a situation where both hadith seems to be ta'arad, a hadith seem to be conflicting with each other, then what's the method of approach that the ulama have laid down? The ulama have mentioned regarding concern that the person find that hadith seem to be conflicting with each other, then the approach of the person, the first step, there are steps to be taken. regarding harmonizing these hadith that seems to be conflicting. The first step that one follows or take is al-bath fi thubut kila hadithan. That the first step, the person to ensure that the person able to authenticate between those hadith. Are those hadith, so to verify and to check that all those hadith are authentic. So the ones that are authentic, you take them. The ones that are not authentic, they're dismissed. And they do not, they will be removed from this discussion. So the first thing is to ensure that hadith, that they are authentic and they're opposing each other. If they're authentic, they have passed stage 1 of authenticity, they go to stage 2. So stage 2's that a person try to al-jam bayna hadithain. So the first step, when hadith seems to have a conflict, the hadith seem to have a conflict between themselves, one saying something, other saying opposite, that a person try to al-jam, ma amkan, that a person try to harmonize, unite between those two hadith. So in trying to harmonize between those hadith, and the ulama, they have laid down a system regarding how to harmonize between those hadith. So at times, as-sahha, which is more authentic, maybe, or so you have different ways of trying to unite, harmonize those hadith. Then if not possible, then the person go to the third step. So the third step, an-naskh. So the person tries to say an-naskh, where the person will take that to if amkan. If it is possible that the person see is one of the hadith maybe was earlier and another came later, and the latter hadith abrogate the prior hadith. So to see as to is there a difference, or to see is there a time span between both hadith, where one was mentioned first in the early days of Islam, then the other came after, and the one that came after, it abrogated the practice, the hadith that came before. That's called an-naskh. So the hadith abrogating each other, sabab, nasikh wal mansukh. But that requires for the person able to can know the time span of each hadith, the timeline of each hadith, which was first and which came after. So the person has to know the timeline of those hadith in knowing which came first or which came later, or the narrator mentioned it, or the Prophet ﷺ himself narrated. So those are a way of detecting whether it falls into that category. As we'll discuss also, that will be discussed separately later. Then if not possible, go to the fourth step, which is at-tarjih. So at-tarjih is of the method that is applied. So the method of tarjih that I mentioned, that the person will then have to accept one hadith and reject the other. Give precedent to some of the hadith over others. So take some and then by this not act upon the others. That's concerning at-tarjih, where the person will give strength to one set of hadith over another. So that's concerning at-tarjih. So the person would act upon some and not act upon others. So that is bab at-tarjih. So you have qara'in of tarjih that the ulama have mentioned regarding in matters of fiqh, or matters regarding concerning how to make at-tarjih. So concerning, and you have ways of at-tarjih that to be explained regarding bab of nasikh wal mansukh. So that's concerning. Then, if not possible regarding tarjih, the person was not able to make a final conclusion, make a final decision in taking one set of hadith over another, then the next step, and that varies one alim to another regarding what will be their final conclusion. Then also the fifth step, if not able to make a tarjih, then the person will make tawaqquf. So tawaqquf, where the person will not take a position. He will not take this hadith over that hadith. So the person will not act upon, not So you leave away both hadith or all the hadith. So the person would tawakkuf, he would kind of somewhat not take a position until there's something that he can find to make him take a position. So that's concerning the message. So tawakkuf will be the last step where a person doesn't per se take a decision or make a decision or pass a final judgment. They are still in wait until they're able can find other qara'in for them to make a final decision. So these are some of those matters that are discussed regarding this discussion regarding hadith, Mukhtalif al-Hadith or Mushkil al-Hadith as mentioned within this topic. So these hadith, as we mentioned, hadith are said to be authentic but seem to be conflicting with other sources. Hadith conflicting with each other by way of Mukhtalif al-Hadith, where both hadith are authentic, or Mushkil al-Hadith, where the conflict with a person, hadith is authentic, but a person not understanding hadith properly is unable to grasp the meaning of the hadith. Or ta'arud with other texts by way of Quran or other hadith, or with ijma, or according to with qiyas, or with aql. So these are what is mentioned within this discussion. So that inshallah ta'ala we have covered some of the points regarding Mukhtalif al-Hadith as mentioned by Ibn Hajar rahimahullah ta'ala, as this is still discussed within the bab of Hadith al-Maqbul. So this is part of the discussion regarding cases where Hadith al-Maqbul that may have some ta'arud, some conflict, and how to how to rectify those cases, and in this case in particular regarding al-mutun. So we discuss concerning the mutun when they have conflict with other matan, what are the approach that one should follow in trying to rectify these cases. But the first of the step is verifying the authenticity of the hadith, and then the other process and steps that is followed in these cases. So that inshallah ta'ala will end the discussion, and in the next session we'll discuss, as they mentioned, regarding qism thani, regarding concerning hadith. We mentioned qism thani, so qism al-awwal discuss hadith al-sahih wal-hasan, and now he'll be discussing regarding qism yata'allaq bi hadith al-mardud, hadith which is said to be mardud, which is hadith al-da'if, and we'll discuss those matters regarding hadith al-da'if in the upcoming sessions. وبالله تعالى توفيق وهذه السبيل والآخر دعوانا الحمد لله آمين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. How long was that?